Hello everybody, hello here in the room and hello over the internet. It's always a privilege to talk about toddlers and to talk to parents and carers who are looking after them, and particularly one of my favourite hot topics, I suppose, is thinking about big feelings, thinking about the ability of toddlers around managing their feelings and building in them the ability to self-regulate. So that's what we're going to focus on tonight to about 8:30, and then we'll have about half an hour for questions. I've been an occupational therapist now for over 30 years, and a lot of people say to me, what's an occupational therapist got to do with toddlers and with parenting? And I suppose one of the things we know is that the parenting occupation is one of the key occupations for supporting young children. And our role is really to support you as parents and caregivers through this sometimes joyous, sometimes tumultuous time in your child's life. I've strong memories myself too of two children and their toddler years, and they're all grown up and living apart from us now, which we really love seeing them flourish. But there's something about the toddler years that you remember in a flashback to significant things that happened during this time. So it very much does lay strong memories in your parenting minds often of this time. So why big feelings? Why is this such an important topic? And really, I think for many parents that I've worked with over the years, this is the thing that will often derail them in their parenting. Often they will find it incredibly difficult when their toddler has these big feelings. And so that's an important reason for us to look at how we're going to support you in your parenting. But also we're beginning to understand more and more how significant supporting children with their feelings is in terms of laying the foundation for a whole lot of future skills, particularly those skills of managing their emotional well-being, managing relationships, and also laying the foundation for learning. The ability to control their emotional state is really foundational to the learning response that comes as your child is getting older. So what are we going to talk about tonight? So really we're going to start by thinking about what's the context of parenting and this idea of parenting in the 21st century and how it is quite a complex environment in which to parent. And then we're going to really focus on strategies, because parents will often say to me, I really want to have strategies. What do I do when? And so we're going to look at a range of strategies that might be useful to you. And then finish off with thinking about why is it so hard and what are some of the self-care things that you'll need to do to look after yourself in the midst of supporting your toddler. So start off with the context of parenting. And I think many people can relate to this slide of thinking about how competitive it can be to be a parent in our community, where it feels like there's always someone that's got the child that's sleeping through the night or is a total delight and never has problems, and then you've got someone who's the sort of used as a stepping stone there for promoting that. I think one of the things I've discovered, though, of working with parents over the years is that, yes, the person on the bottom does need a lot of support, but the person who's actually in the number one position there, it's really a thin veneer of confidence that often they too are struggling with their parenting, and really everyone in the parenting world knows that there are some days that are much harder than others, and that how we're portrayed in the outside world isn't always how it feels on the inside. I think one of the things we struggle with too in our community is this feeling of blame and this idea that parents are to blame for a lot of children's struggles. And sometimes that comes from externally. We get those messages, particularly when we're in the shopping centre queues. But we can also be whipping ourselves as parents and being quite sort of derogatory to ourselves of how we're going in the parenting sphere. And that doesn't often lead to positive outcomes if it sort of led to feeling good as a parent and supporting you, maybe there would be use in it, but usually that self-blaming is not so helpful. We also know that in the world of social media that we can feel really isolated in our parenting, particularly when we see so many images coming through Facebook and other sort of forms of social media around how happy and delightful everyone else is having in terms of their parenting experience. And this can really set up more feelings of isolation. And just thinking of technology, I think there is a growing feeling of distraction in our parenting where it's incredibly difficult to be without our mobile phones, our devices, that our minds are often preoccupied. I have to say though, this fairly new phenomena, really I think for many years parents struggle to be present with their children, whether or not they have the device in their hand or not, because sometimes our minds are so busy that it's very difficult to actually be focused on what's happening in the present moment. But obviously with technology, we're beginning to understand it can have quite significant impacts on our children and on ourselves. I mean, in this image, we're seeing children here and parents with their devices in bed. And yet we know that the white light of screen time interrupts the rhythms of sleep. And that, yes, you may fall asleep, but you often get a delayed waking. So this could lead to tired households. And we know tired, cranky children and tired, cranky adults, it's much harder to kind of help them manage their feelings. I think the other thing is, which I've already alluded to, is that parenting in the community when we're in public can be incredibly stressful. Again, I use the shopping centre experience here that we can feel like the gaze of the community is on us. Whether or not it actually is or not, I certainly hear parents say, oh, someone came up and told me, can't you control your child? So sometimes it definitely is. Other times it might be a perception that people are being sort of watching you in your parenting and feeling critical of you as a parent. And this, of course, adds more stress to us as parents. And we can sometimes get this message that we might be screwing up our kids. That this is a significant stage of children's development, and we can feel that pressure that are we messing this up somehow? I think the other thing to say, and it's probably quite a landmark day to say it with the yes vote coming in, that really family unit doesn't look like The Simpsons very much anymore. Mother and father and 2.2 children isn't the standard family unit anymore. There's a whole range of different sorts of families that are out there, and that brings with it joys and challenges. Many children are raised by grandparents, by foster carers, by a range of family members. And I think we need to kind of recognise that The Simpsons kind of cutout image is probably not what many people are experiencing. And again, people can feel isolated when they don't measure up to these kind of images in our society. I think the other thing to say too is that many parents feel their role is invisible, that it's not seen by the outside world. So on one hand, incredibly visible, on the other hand, invisible. It's sort of behind closed doors. And also, we often are not recognising that we're all often juggling more than one role. So there's often more than just the role of being a parent. There's also managing households and maybe managing a business and managing your relationships with your partner and parents and a whole range of other relationships. So parenting in itself is one aspect often of very complex lives. I think the final thing to say about the context of parenting is that there's a plethora of information out there about how to parent. and it can be incredibly confusing when you get different messages about what's the right thing, what's the wrong thing to do around parenting. And you can go to bookshops and find masses of information about parenting, giving quite conflicting information to you as a parent. And that can really set you back often to know, I don't know, and get paralysed if I don't know what I should be doing. I suppose one of the things that I think about on a presentation like this is here you are, again, potentially going to get overloaded with more information, and that could be quite sort of not a positive experience. So one of the things I'd like to say at the beginning is really for you to take what you need from tonight's presentation. I'm going to present a range of different strategies, and there might be one or maybe two that you think they're the ones that I think are maybe useful for me to explore further, rather than feeling you have to take everything on board. I think the other thing I want to say too is that the strategies that I'm going to be presenting are kind of not Mandy Seyfang strategies, though I'd love to claim them as my own, but they've really come from the research and from the information that now is out there around best practice for supporting toddlers' social and emotional development. So you can, reflect that the information presented has come from reliable sources. You'll see sometimes I've put references there, and I can mention some of the readings that if you're interested to follow that up later as well. Okay, so with that stage set, I think then it's really thinking about welcome to the club. Yeah, so the idea that all parents have wisdom, but also all parents struggle with some aspect of parenting, I think is the reality. Also the idea it's hard to give what you might not have got. We know now that parenting template of how you go about parenting is strongly linked to how you were parented yourself. And so sometimes that can create its own struggles. And sometimes responding to your child doesn't always feel comfortable. It can feel uncomfortable rather than going with what might feel like it's an easy or happy response to do for your child. But the good news is too, it's not necessary to do this perfectly. So if you have the benchmark of I must be perfect all the time as a parent, that needs to be challenged tonight, because really there are benefits to actually rupture and repair. So not getting things right actually has some advantages for your child to experience what it's like to experience frustration and broken relationships that can be repaired, which is an important idea for toddlers to experience. So what we're going to do is I'm going to introduce you to a program that occupational therapists have developed in the children's centres here in South Australia. And it's an 8-session program that is called Being with Big Feelings, and it's for parents of toddlers and young children. And in each of the sessions, we go through different strategies, noticing, investing, naming, making meaning, checking in, soothing, reconnecting, and self-care. And what I'm planning to do tonight is give you a little taster of each of those sessions. We're not going to obviously get to go through all of the content of the program, but just a little taster. And you might like to follow up with children's centres about the program if you wanted to engage in more exploration around these topics. You'll notice that we gave you a children's centre brochure that will have your local children's centres listed there if you want to discover more about this program. So the first session that we run, and the first topic we're going to look at tonight, is the idea of noticing. So when we say noticing, what do we mean? So noticing feelings, and this is a kind of important idea because often one of the things that parents will report to us is they notice feelings, particularly intense feelings of anger and often intense feelings of fear, but often they miss other feeling states. And one of the things that can be really useful right at the beginning is to begin to be more of a noticer of the range of feelings that your toddler is expressing, and to start giving them words for your toddler. The other thing to think about with noticing is not just the different array of feelings, but also noticing that feelings actually occur in a cycle, and that a feeling state occurs often after a trigger, and there's early warning signs before the complete meltdown in stage 3. And importantly, there's a recovery time after the meltdown that often we need to particularly focus on how to support children in the recovery time, and then supporting them back into the sort of engaging in participation in stage 5. And again, one of the things that parents will often say to us is that the child seems to go from happy playing to this. Out of the blue, they've gone from playing happily to really distressed state. And it's like the early warning signs were missed, that the child was beginning to escalate. And sometimes toddlers do have incredibly quick escalation, but usually you are able to train yourself to pick up those early warning signs, which can sometimes help you to prevent the escalation to distress. I put this slide in because we've just got a new cat. We call him Sunny. He's very sweet, though I used a dog slide here. Sorry about that, Sunny. But both dogs and cats, we know they give off subtle cues in their body that they're showing fear or anxiety or distress. And we become very good often at picking animals' cues. And often it is in the ears and in the eyes, these sort of subtle kind of body cues. The thing I suppose that can be challenging for us though with young children is working out what are their subtle cues. And each child will be different as to their subtle cues. And it can be very important, particularly if you're in a caregiving role of many children, to really be able to identify individual cues that a child is beginning to escalate in that feeling cycle. I often say we don't look so much to the ears for children, though sometimes you do see the red flush in the ears, but the eyes often are the window to the soul. So actually focusing on a child's eyes, you often can pick up their emotional state, but also looking at their breathing, looking at their activity, agitation levels, their whole body kind of response, their hands and how their hands are open or closed. These are ways in which we can begin to pick up our children's early warning signs and perhaps intervene before the child reaches that crescendo. The other thing I often like to highlight with reading the cues is also thinking about reading your own body cues. I think one of the things that we need to really be aware of is that we're often a thermometer ourselves to the emotional state of our toddlers. So reading our own body cues can actually give us a whole lot of information about what might be happening for our toddlers. So how do we know that we're beginning to pick up that our toddler is getting dysregulated or unsettled or beginning on that cycle? Do we start sort of clenching our shoulders up? Do we start talking with more tightness in our voice? Maybe talking more rapidly? What are the ways in which we pick up our own body cues that things are beginning to escalate? So that's just a little bit about noticing, and hopefully gives you a bit of a taste for thinking through how it's really important to recognise the different feelings, but also the cycle of feelings, and beginning to think about bodily cues that might tell us that things are beginning to escalate. So the second topic is around looking at investing. And we really focus on this a lot, and you'll see that I've got a number of slides on this. Again, over the years, parents will say to me, how do I manage the difficult behaviour, or how do I manage difficult feelings? And with a kind of want to be at that end of the management of when the meltdowns happened and the difficult behaviour. And one of the things we know from research is that if we can actually provide a whole lot of investing in positive experiences with our children, it actually decreases the number of difficult, challenging behaviours and the number of big feeling moments that need support. So you'll see here that we're going to look at a whole lot of ideas around how do we put money in the piggy bank, as it were, invest in our children in positive experiences that actually will lead to less meltdown moments. So what do I mean by that? Well, here's an example of what I don't mean by that. Yeah. I think what's interesting in this slide is it looks like Dad had the intention to actually get down on the floor with the baby. So there looks like there was an intention there, to be in the play space. He's on the play mat. The baby not so much. But then something's got in his way of being able to connect with his baby. Now, it's a snapshot in time, so it could be that he's looking up how to play with baby, so we don't know. But sometimes it is very difficult to actually put the time into babies and toddlers. I say to parents often, see if you can find 15 minutes a day where you can sit down and play with your child, and often they'll say that's really hard to find. It's really hard to find 15 minutes a day to do that, and that often is part of the difficulty. The other thing to think about with investing is really investing in trying to understand the temperament of your child and your own temperament, and where there's matches and mismatches. So if we look at an example of that, it could be that your child is quite placid and really quite cautious, but you're more of an active, outgoing type person, and so you like to be out and about a lot. And this might be a mismatch with your toddler, who finds being out in exploration quite challenging. And so you can see how that might mean that you have more meltdown moments. It's kind of like when you hear parents say, oh, having a child's never going to change our lifestyle, and don't you, sitting there, it doesn't work like that. Often you do have to adapt to take into account that your child has their own temperament and their own ways of being. As I said, this idea of investing in play dates, so 15 to 20 minutes 3 times a week of total focus on your child has shown to improve the child's emotional well-being. So that's not a lot of time, is it? But there's a trick to it, and this is where sometimes we think, oh, I'm doing this, but there's a bit of a trick to this type of approach. And what the trick is allowing the child to lead the interaction, and that's the trick. I think, unfortunately, many of us have been influenced by Sesame Street and Play School in that teaching mode, so that when we sit down with our child and they grab the cow and they start bringing it over to us, we'll say, and what does the cow say? Yeah? Or they get a block and we say, what colour's the block? Can you put it on top of the other block and build a tower? It's like we've got scripts in our head about how the play should go, and we direct the play. Now, there can be some moments that it's fine to do that, but in this particular way of playing that I'm describing, 15 to 20 minutes 3 times a week, it's a different sort of play. It's a play where you are available and not distracted, completely present, and the child leads the play and you follow. You follow the child. Often it does mean kind of putting our hands under our bottom and zipping our lip a bit, because those scripts come out so quickly otherwise. And use mirroring, like really following what the child's doing and mirroring that. Children can feel very seen and very understood and very kind of like you're there for them when you mirror what they're doing. So in this idea, basically it is a dance, but the child is kind of leading the dance. And the rules in this kind of child-led play is basically you stay safe, I stay safe, and things stay safe. And apart from that, anything's up for grabs. So you try and limit the number of no's that you say. Yeah, so you create the environment where it is going to be contained. So often I say, use a particular same room and bring out the same box of toys. You don't need lots of toys, but set it up in the same way. This is our special time, and you get to lead, and I'm going to follow, and I'm just here with you, and then sort of have that happen. Again, dramatic turnarounds can happen with this more watch, wait and wonder approach. The other thing to think about is investing in pretend play. Your toddler will probably just be emerging into this pretend play world, with beginning to do things to objects like talking to Dolly and giving injections and starting to create storylines. In this pretend play world, this is where they're beginning to kind of explore talking about feelings and beginning to imagine another's experience, which is an important part of learning about empathy, which is important in the feeling state. So again, encouraging pretend play can actually help you with them learning about how to manage their feelings. And an interesting one, invest in physical play. Rough and tumble play has a place in all of this, because in rough and tumble play, your child is learning about how to manage those peaks in arousal of being stirred up and then learning how to come back down, which is what happens in feelings, isn't it? That you get, your heart rate going up and big feeling, your body starts to feel different, and then we're able to bring it back down to calm, which is very similar to rough and tumble play. I always put a caveat, though, on rough and tumble play. We have to be incredibly sensitive to the window of tolerance of our toddlers, and making sure that we are checking in that it's still an enjoyable experience for our toddlers, because so many times, it'll all end in tears, can actually happen, can't it, in this kind of physical play area. Investing in creating success. One of the cleverest things you can do often as a parent or carer is give your child the experience where they think they did it and you had nothing to do with it, but you actually scaffold the experience so that it did actually go in, or it did actually go on top, those kinds of things. Now you see, this is different sort of play to what I was describing before. So there is a place for this kind of play, and where the child feels, oh, I did it. Again, the more your child feels confident in themselves as a successful little person, that actually helps them sort of get calm and centred and help to manage those big feelings when they come. And the other thing I like to introduce to parents is this idea of having a mix of play spaces. Again, I think sometimes we're dominated in our culture by thinking about brain power space or kids power space, which is, where you've got free play in kids power space to do whatever you want, and brain power is, focusing on puzzles and, complex tasks. Whereas the bonding space and a womb-like space, these are very important for children, particularly, say, if you're thinking about a childcare environment, that there is a space in which children can have some downtime. Because if you're over-aroused a lot of the time and you can't actually drop down to resting, then you're going to have more meltdown moments. And that can be the same at home as well. Do we have a lot of stimulation happening at home? The big screen telly's on all day, the noise is on all day from the radio. Is there any kind of quiet space, sort of connected space with the caregiver? And again, if the child's staying out a lot in play, I would be making sure I initiate bonding space with the child so that they're not staying out for hours without connecting in with you. Because again, on the inside, they might be running out of reserves and they need a top up from you, but they're not coming in to get it because they might be so interested in what they're doing, but then it's more likely to end in a meltdown moment. And this idea of investing in routines is really important because a toddler is just beginning to get the idea that the world is a big, big place, and that can really destabilise them to feel like it's an overwhelming place. Whereas if you begin to create the environment as quite predictable and there's lots of routines that are in your day and in their day, it actually can really support them to actually feel more settled and calm. Again, thinking back to my own experience with my two children, it always seemed to be that when they were in their toddler years that there were challenges in terms of, moving house or doing a renovation and it's like, how stressful is that right when you want things to be predictable and consistent, it's not predictable and consistent. But working out ways in which even in the chaos of a house renovation, you could have some predictability and consistency. I think the other thing about routines, I often think here, there's another word that goes with this, is rituals. Family rituals are incredibly important, and thinking about how as our little family unit create our own family rituals. What do we do as a family that marks us as a specific family? And that can really help a child feel very connected to their family unit. So thinking about my own family growing up, Sunday night fish and chips, it's a ritual. The watching of The Sound of Music, how many times can I see that movie? I tell my parents this all the time. Those kind of family rituals that become a rich tapestry then of ownership of this is our family. We've got rituals coming up around Christmas, haven't we? And what we can do to create rituals for a child to feel very connected to the family. And one of the last ones around investing, you see I could go on about investing a lot. If we invest lots of energy, we often have less meltdown moments. This idea of investing in transition moments. So here's a lovely scene here of, two carers with the two children having a wonderful time in the sandpit. Now, again, how do we support this moment not to be a meltdown moment when it's time to go home? When it's time. So any moment where a child has to move from one activity to another activity is what I think of as a transition moment. And the day is filled with them. And often these are the moments that you have big meltdowns. Yeah, so moving from outside play to mat time, moving from the sandpit to going home, moving from playing an activity and coming to the table for tea. These are transition moments. So supporting children so that they're actually ready for the moment, so as best as you can, and then giving them support for moving into the next activity. And often they will need more than, come on, it's time to go. They might need more physical guidance to actually do that. Sometimes offering a choice can be useful. Would you like to carry the buckets or the spades back to the car? Yeah, and so it's like, we're going to the car. It's not, are we going now or not? That's not a good choice to offer because the child will want to stay. But offering the choice of, the bucket or the spade, would you like to carry? And we'll be going soon. So, getting ready for the movement. So investing is a really important part of supporting children with their big feelings. The next one we're going more into, okay, the big feeling is happening here. What do we kind of do about it? So we might have noticed and we might have invested in the hope that we can prevent these kind of big feelings from occurring. But sometimes they do occur, and sometimes quite a lot they occur. So we need to work out what do we do when a child is experiencing an intense feeling. And naming is this next session or this next topic. And again, building our own emotional literacy, words to describe what your child is feeling. Having a whole range of feeling words can be really useful rather than just, you feel happy, you feel sad, you feel angry. Beginning to kind of build on that so that you've got more words up your sleeve for describing how your child is feeling can be very useful. I think one of the things that parents often struggle with is they're hoping their child will name the feeling. So, how are you feeling? We want to ask the child. But when a child is having a very intense feeling, it's very difficult for them to actually use their words. And it can be the same for us as adults. If you have a very intense feeling, accessing your words can be really difficult. Now, why does this happen? Well, Dan Siegel, who's does a lot of work around parenting, he's given this example of what happens is you flip your lid. And he describes the brain as by using a hand model. So he says that your brain is like this. So you've got the two hemispheres, with the cortex here. Imagine that it's like that. And that's your thinking brain is on top. And interestingly, a child's brain actually grows up from the base to the top. So they have a much thinner layer of thinking until they're getting older and their brain's keeping on growing. They're not born with their brain fully formed, which is why they don't jump up like a little calf and be able to walk straight away. They're quite different. Babies' brains continues to grow for many years, but particularly in those first couple of years. So the thinking brain is on top. And then if we lift that up, this is the feeling part of the brain, the limbic system, and this is the fight-flight, system is down here near the spinal cord. And what happens when a child has a big, intense feeling and a big meltdown, let's imagine they throw themselves on the ground and they're in a lot of distress, it's like they've flipped their lid. They can't use their thinking brain anymore, and they're responding from an emotional and then fight-flight kind of response. And it's very difficult for them at that point if you ask them questions. Why are you doing that? Come to tea. I've asked you once before to use this kind of thinking part of their brain. It's very difficult. And it's quite an important concept to kind of get in, because often we're going in with language and logic, and if they've flipped their lid, it's not going to kind of land in any kind of thinking space. So this is what they call the reptilian dive, the dive towards more of that fight-flight kind of instinctual response without being able to use that thinking brain. But the other thing that happens is there's a dive downwards, but there's also a dive acrossways, which if you think of the two hemispheres, I don't know if you ever on Facebook and says, are you more right hemisphere or left hemisphere? So the left hemisphere is where language and logic kind of resides in your left brain. I only remember that because of the L, That's how simple my brain can work sometimes, left, language, logic. And the right brain is much more about impulse and emotion and those sorts of things. And when there's a big feeling, they know from watching on the scans that the left brain gets shut down and the right brain gets activated, as well as it goes down towards the fight-flight. So again, this is one of the reasons why it's incredibly difficult to reason with a distressed person, let alone a distressed toddler who's got even less kind of cortex to work with until it sort of more develops. So what do we have to do about this? And this is the kind of critical part. Really, it's over to us to do the naming of the feeling. So we go in and say, you feel cross, because mum said no to the lolly or whatever it is. Or you feel cross because we have to leave the sandpit and you were having such a good time. So you're naming, but it's the empathy factor that's the critical bit, because in some ways the words might not exactly connect, because of the flipped brain. But the non-verbals, the way that you say it and your facial expression, that is what actually gets through, because that's a right brain response. The right brain is really into all of that non-verbally stuff. So sometimes it's more in your kind of how you say it that's more important than what you say. And how do we get ourselves in an empathy state when we've got a child that's having a major meltdown? We're going to get to that. But you can see this is what sort of is required. And what does that connection look like? So here's an example of this is from Dan Siegel. So again, if you Google Dan Siegel, if you want to read more, he's got an amazing amount of books on parenting that are incredibly helpful. So, but here's a sort of connection with naming. Oh, sweetie, you're having a hard time. And naming what's going on for the child. But you see the empathy there. You see the adult's face there looking, like sad, like the child is looking sad. Now, often we can do this for sadness. It's with anger that we can find it more tricky. But working out how we can do some mirroring. I can see you're so frustrated about that. So bringing in the kind of frustration, or you're so cross. I can see you're really cross about that. Some way in which the child gets it, that you know how they're feeling, while keeping yourself quite calm and centred. So a little bit about naming, and then we go on to thinking about making meaning. And again, this is a really key part of parenting toddlers. Because again, often if you said to them, why did you behave like that? They won't have words to describe it. It's like you have to be the detective to work out why they might be struggling with their feelings, and trying to make meaning of what is her or his behaviour telling me, what's underneath the presenting feeling that I'm seeing. And I often use the analogy of the Titanic that went down when it looked like it was a tip of an iceberg, but underneath the iceberg was the huge ice that tipped the Titanic up. And it can be like that for our toddlers, that on the surface we think there's a certain thing presented to us and it's not too bad, but underneath there can be a whole lot of stuff that's going on that we need to understand if we're going to kind of make sense of what's happening for them. As humans, we're all meaning makers. We don't behave for no reason. There's always a reason for behaviour, and all behaviour has meaning. It's hard to work out the meaning sometimes of our toddlers. It's definitely hard, and it can be a struggle, but usually when we put our minds to it, the thinking mind of the adult is so important, we can work it out. So, and here's just the beginning of some questions. So it's asking these sort of questions of yourself. Is the child hungry, angry, lonely, tired? What are the beginning sort of questions that you can ask? What is the child feeling? What are they needing? These kinds of questions help us to make meaning of the surface feeling that we're seeing. I mean, sometimes we really do have to begin to think about what's it like to be in the child's shoes? Because again, as an adult, we can get quite disconnected from their experience. I think I was reading today that an adult is 3 times the height of a toddler. And if we had someone 3 times the height of us looking down on us, what would that feel like for us? And here is an example of the toddler having a different experience potentially from the caregiver there. Caregiver wandering through a lovely park, and the toddler, again, you can see the body signs here that the toddler's beginning to get distressed, potentially of the hands behind the head, the kind of, you get the feeling that he could be quite anxious here. And why might that be anxiety provoking? Because the caregiver's ahead, he doesn't know where the path is leading. Again, I was just reading today, the toddler who hears the voice of their father who's overseas, and he hears it on the telephone. It's like, oh, Daddy's on the phone, do you want to talk? And that can be incredibly scary for a toddler, because it's like, how did Daddy get inside the telephone? And he's gone, and I can't see him, and now he's in the telephone. It's sort of like every step for a toddler is learning about this very complex world that we often take for granted, that we know what's going on, that Dad's not in the phone, that he's we use these devices to connect, but it's like these are all new learning experiences, and we sometimes need to come back and reposition ourselves in the toddler shoes. So walking in my shoes and seeing the world through my eyes can be such a useful kind of starting point in terms of making meaning of what's happening for your toddler. I think too, just remembering that, again, as toddlers and adults, we operate quite differently. So for us, often we have a list of things to do. And I don't know if you've ever experienced it, but it's often when you've got a list of really important things to do and you've got an expectation that you're going to do that list, that you have more struggles with your toddler. It's like once you start going, today I'm going to achieve this, this and this, it's like it completely gets derailed. And one of the things, I suppose, is recognising that your toddler doesn't work in the same way like that. They're not so much driven by past, present and future. They're much more in the present moment. And again, this can lead to those clashes when you might have expectations of the future and your toddler's not in the same wavelength there. So when you think, I'm coming back to the supermarket each time because I know that it's a challenging space for many parents with toddlers, but there can be lots of reasons why this toddler might be distressed, and you might already start to have hypotheses. As a parent, I think it's really good to have those questions in your mind, like, what could be going on for my toddler? Okay, and sometimes it can be as simple as, is he sitting in a wet nappy, you know? But sometimes it might be more about thinking, what would it be like to be in a trolley where you can't run and you can't explore, when this child might be very active and wanting to be out and touching everything? And supermarkets are really tough places because look at all those shiny objects that are so special all along, and I can't touch any of them. That is really tough. And also they're very stimulating places, aren't they? Often pipe music, lots of visuals, lots of noise. And again, sometimes we're taking our toddlers into these places when they're already depleted. So they've had a full day and we're just going to pop in quickly to pick up that thing, and then it becomes kind of disaster mode. So there can be a whole lot of reasons why a toddler might find this environment quite challenging. So it is useful just to come back and check our expectations. And in this image we see, if you look over to the 3 to 6 years at this end, you see that emotional regulation really is only beginning to be developed from 3 to 6 years. So really expecting our toddlers to manage their intense feelings on their own really is probably not where they're at in terms of their development. They really need a lot more support because of their still growing brain and still growing experience of the world. And that's why often you get this kind of scenario. I'm sure many of you have seen this, a toddler's rule of possession. Yeah, if it's like mine, if I like it, it's mine. You can read through until the final one. If it's broken, it's yours. So, I mean, sharing is incredibly difficult for a toddler. And again, often we have toddlers where we're expecting them to play alongside of with other toddlers for quite long periods of time, because often we're enjoying connecting with other parents and think, this is great, we're having a nice cup of tea and the kids are playing nicely. They will not be able to sustain nice play for very long at all, probably minutes, if that, because it's very difficult for them to think about the other's experience. To learn about what another child experiences, they need to have had lots of experience of someone understanding their experience. It's like you build up their capacity for empathy by being that empathy person for them first. So I don't know if you ever want to watch a good YouTube clip, but I quite like the marshmallow test. Again, it's sort of highlighting, here's a little bit older child, he looks like he's more sort of 3 to 4, and they put these young children through the marshmallow test. And basically they invite them to come into a room and they have one marshmallow sitting on a plate. And they say to them, if you wait for a few minutes, you'll get 2 marshmallows. Or you can eat this one now. So it's like, can the child wait? And you see this little one here going through the motions of, the painfulness of it. When you watch other children, some of them, they're like sniffing at it and like licking. It's like so hard, to hold back. And you see this little one, he couldn't wait. It's like too impossible. And so it's really tough. Again, that sort of self-control really doesn't develop until a lot older. And again, often we can have quite unrealistic expectations of our children of, don't touch, that precious item, and it's there, and they just so want to touch it. It's like, how can I not touch it? Particularly treasured objects, like mobile phones, because they see how important they are to us. It's like, I want to touch that. You're touching that. I want to touch that. So again, just thinking through how do we set those environments up so that we're more realistic to where they're at in their development. I think the other thing to kind of think through is sometimes anger, which is a very difficult emotion for us to kind of connect with. Often when we're with angry other people, we actually want to withdraw. But sometimes in anger, it's their way of expressing, I actually need you. I need you to come in, not leave me and go out. So children haven't kind of learnt that when they have the temper tantrum and it's really intense anger and emotion like that makes you want to kind of pull back. They're hoping that you're going to come in. Now, when I say that, that's often at an unconscious level. They might say, go away, I don't want you. They might be telling you, get out. But really, we know that when children are very distressed, they actually do want the caregiver to stay in. Now, maybe not flood in and kind of, hold and cuddle them, but just keep being available. That's kind of what they're looking for, that kind of connection. And of course, that's challenging for us if they're saying to go away. You feel like, okay, I'm out of here. But really, it's about understanding that under that surface level, there can be a whole lot of complex emotions that need us to keep staying predictable and consistent and available for them. So then we come to checking in, and sometimes people go, what do you mean by checking in? And I really think of it as checking in on yourself, really, at this point. Because you as the calm-centred adult is so critical to this whole picture, and it can be incredibly difficult to keep yourself in that space. And understanding the way that we view things and our state of mind makes a huge difference. I'm very lucky to work with Joanna DeCourt, who's a lovely occupational therapist down south, and she's also a talented artist here. She did this picture for me, and I said, I'm really looking for something that shows, where it's the parents' headset of how they read the world rather than what the world actually is like. And you can see she's done a great job here of thinking, here's this person under the umbrella, but it's still raining. It's still like not protecting their experience. So yourself if you wake up in a grumpy mood, or you're preoccupied with the injustices of this world. Often it can be very difficult to, warm up to being friendly and warm and open and responsive to our children's needs. So our own state of mind is incredibly important. I was reminded about this with this experiment that I always wonder who creates these experiments. Do you ever sort of think what their psychological profile is? But anyway, in this experiment, what they did with the toddler, or a younger baby to toddler, was they created this illusion that the toddler was going to fall off a visual cliff, going to fall off the cliff. See, who created that? I don't know. But anyway, it's quite a powerful experiment. It's called the visual cliff experiment. And what they found was that the toddler was over on the checkered end, and when the caregiver showed a fear face, so looking frightened, no words were allowed to be exchanged, only the non-verbals, a fear face, as the toddler came to the edge, the toddler wouldn't go over the edge. They stayed back. Yeah? But when the parent, in this situation you see there, showed a kind of happy, welcoming, warm face, the toddler did what was completely unnatural and went over the visual cliff. They didn't fall because they weren't that cruel, the psychologist who invented this study. There was a perspex there and they just sort of went across. But it was one of those first experiments that really highlighted the power of the face of the caregiver to the toddler's sort of experience and the way they interpret their world. So what does this mean in our day-to-day experiences? What kind of face are we showing to our toddlers? And often we're not aware of it, are we? We're just doing our natural kind of thing. And, are we sort of becoming more aware of what is the face that I'm giving to my toddler? Potentially, how does that make a difference? I give a good example here and this was one that I experienced myself with my children, of, as they went out into the world, so if they went off to kindy or off to childcare, what face was I showing as they went out? Maybe worried. And then bingo, as they social reference, so look back to my face to make sense of their world, it's like, I'm worried. I'm worried too. I'm worried about this going out here into this world of, childcare or kindy. And then their worried face comes back to me. I get more worried when I see their worried face coming back at me. So you see how the cycle can kind of develop. Now, in the same way that can happen when your toddler is showing you this face. So this face comes at you of distress, and then what face do you give back? Like whether or not it's a cranky face, oh, come on. You might not even express the words, but it's in the non-verbals that your child is using your face to make sense of where things are at. And of course, this is where we need to work out how do we stay calm and centred and available and warm when we're met with a child who's feeling very distressed. And of course, that can be quite challenging. At this point, it can be useful to think about the safety breath. And this is a strategy I often talk to parents about as they're approaching a child who's either beginning to show early warning signs in the cycle or they're really at their meltdown moment, to do a quick safety breath. Because if we just step in to interact, often we go on what I call is automatic pilot, and we're parenting kind of on automatic and we're just reacting to what's in front of us. We're probably not using our full cortex, our thinking mind. And so giving yourself the safety breath can just kind of get yourself calm and centred for then doing the response. And it just gives you that little minute break between the action and the reaction. You just give yourself a little minute break. It's not even a minute, it's one breath in and out. If it was 1 minute, that could be worrying. So just a little safety breath. And I usually say, do the breathe through your nose and out through your mouth. And quick visualisation is easy to get yourself really in that rather than beginning to ruminate. What is that little, what's that? It's like, no, do the really smelling the roses, blowing the candle. Yeah, so it's like I'm going to smell in and blow out, steady myself. I usually say 2 feet on the ground so you feel grounded, and then do your approach, that little safety breath so that you're in a better state of mind to do that response rather than clouded by what's happening in that moment. I also want to talk a little bit about soothing, which is the next topic. And soothing's a really important part of helping your child to regulate. We know that when babies are born, they need a lot of support from their caregivers to settle. And we're very good often at being able to do that. As children separate and become more independent, we often have then stepped back and think we don't have to help them with soothing. But soothing is a really important part in this stage of supporting them to down-regulate or to become calm. So what do we mean by soothing? And I tend to think of soothing as having 2 layers to it. So the first layer is your relationship. Your relationship is like the foundation. And then the next layer is you can use some sensory strategies to help you. So think about the relationship first, and that's where the child gets a message, even in the midst of their distress and challenging behaviour, that you're not alone, I'm here, and you're worth it. Yeah, so you're giving the message. Now, you might not use those words, just by your presence, you're giving that message. You know, I'm here for you, and I love you, and you're worth it, and you're having a struggle. You're not alone. I'm here. You're worth it. And then what you're then hoping to do is then, through your relationship with the child, create a calming cycle. So if we think about that, and this is the work of Saruf, he talked about the regulation of an infant or a toddler's emotion and arousal occurs in the relationship with the adult or the parent. And it's a what they call a dyadic, which means that the child affects the parent, which the parent then affects the child, which then affects the parent, which then affects the child. It kind of is a circular thing, which means it can go in a positive direction of calming, or it could go in a negative direction of becoming a vicious cycle. Yeah, and we'll look at that in a moment. But you see, when it becomes a calming cycle, you imagine your child's really distressed and you're able to come in and provide that kind of, I'm here, you're worth it, I'm going to support you in this. And because of your presence, it actually helps the child to begin to calm more, and then that helps you feel more confident, and you're calming, and then they're catching your calming and they're getting calmer, and that becomes a positive cycle. It can also spin, though, in the other direction, where it becomes a vicious cycle, where, the child is distressed and the parent gets frustrated and might start with demands. Come on, I asked you to do that before, and the child then revs up to sort of more distressed behaviour, and you end up with this anger kind of vicious cycle of distress. And this cycle is very common when you're really trying to get on top of the behaviour, and you're thinking, I want to stop this behaviour right now, and I'm going to put in rules and limits, and that can begin to spin it into this vicious cycle. Whereas if you can pull away from that and be much more in that empathy space, you often can get off of this vicious cycle to a more soothing cycle. There's a term called entrainment, which I quite like. I think I like it because I remember playing on these as a child. I actually was a bit frightened of them, to be honest, because I think I had friends that were very good at making it spin really fast. I don't know if you see them in playgrounds much anymore, probably because there were lots of accidents on them. But anyway, so basically you get on and you go really, really fast and round and round and round, and then you jump off, and it's all very exciting. But the idea of entrainment is that the ability of the more powerful, stronger rhythm, creating the sort of causing the weaker rhythmic pattern to kind of synchronise with it. So if you imagine yourself that you've got a child who's really out of control and they're spinning fast, yeah, they're kind of really distressed and over-aroused and upset. It's like you've got to jump onto the kind of distress to begin with before you can actually start to slow it down. So that's why this idea of matching and mirroring initially with that empathy response, and then beginning to kind of settle it. If I give you an example, and sometimes we do this naturalistically, but other times we might have to deliberately do it because it might not come so easily. So imagine the child who's really upset about something, and they're saying, I want it, I want that thing, like that. You know how toddlers do that, repeat, short sentences. And then you might come in and say, I know, you want it, you really wanted it. It's so hard. And Mum said no, Now, when I did that, it's like I matched the kind of intensity, but then I'm starting to drag it back just with the speed of my voice and the kind of going into more sadness rather than anger, starting to shift the anger sort of to a different space. My stronger rhythm of being calm and centred is influencing their rhythm. It's like I got on their fast track and then kind of dragged it back and back to a sort of more regulated sort of space. And that's what you can do with your relationship. That's what you can do as you're kind of connecting first with your child and then doing that empathy and then really starting to think how I then bring that down to a more soothed space. Now, I go back to the image of the baby because, again, we often know how to soothe babies. So we bring them into us, and a safe place, and we give that skin-to-skin contact often. We give deep pressure. We kind of, might hold them quite tightly. Sometimes we wrap them and then hold them. And then often we do a bit of movement, patting, and then we might bring in white noise. Shh, shh. Now, these are interesting sensory elements that we're doing for that baby, as well as you see the foundation of the relationship. If the child doesn't feel safe with the caregiver and the caregiver isn't kind of available and there for them, it's probably not going to work whether or not you do fancy sensory things or not. But the sensory part of this is quite significant. So thinking about, for older children, how can we give them deep pressure? How can we give them rhythm? How can we give them the white noise? How can we give them that calming sort of sensory experience to help them with soothing? And we know things like swings can be really helpful, as can trampolines, again giving some rhythm, back and forth in swings. Deep pressure can be good, so encouraging a sort of a hug or sitting in a beanbag that gives a nice deep sort of pressure, or again giving the hug ourselves if the child will accept it. So thinking about how can we give those sensory elements to a child when they're having these kind of big meltdown moments. And again, we can learn from Dan Siegel's work, this idea of comforting, getting below the eye level of the child. So instead of being the 3 times as tall looking down on, getting ourselves underneath. Again, I think that can help us really with the empathy. I know, I'm right here. You see the kind of presence of this parent with the child who's really distressed. And again, giving some some contact there with the hands. Again, some children won't accept that to begin with, but you know the direction you're heading in here. Sometimes it's like we might have to start off, you're over there and I'm over here, but slowly, I'm going to try and bridge the gap to be more available to you. Schools are interested in these ideas. This comes from a sort of more of a school approach for older children. But you see here the clam cuddle, using the mouth a lot. Again, think baby. Think a lot of their calming is used with sucking and with using their mouth to kind of calm themselves. Again, sometimes toddlers, you see them biting. And biting other children. Often that's because they're over-aroused and they're trying to use the biting, their mouth, to actually calm them down. So thinking about how else could we use the mouth to kind of... So again, getting children to suck through straws. Thick shakes are always good because that's a lot of hard sucking. Can actually be quite calming for children. And thinking about the body and how the body can be used to help with calming. Again, I was just reading today about what can you do when children come home from school. This is older children. But they say about, not peppering children with lots of questions, but more getting them to do some physical kind of movements can actually help release a lot of the stress that they've been held when they're trying to do a lot of hard performance at school or in out-of-home care. Because often when they get home, then you get resurgence of quite a lot of challenging behaviour as they kind of, let go of their kind of tension of the day. And what can you do as a caregiver, sort of helping them use their body to actually release a lot of that tension can be really useful. So soothing is a key element to this model and really important for us to think about. Along with that is thinking about reconnecting. And this is one of my favourite aspects of this program and of the work with parents and toddlers, because it's one of the things that we often forget to do. Because once the the storm has passed, we think, don't go back there, let's move on to the next activity, and, almost like terrified to go back and reignite it again, of whatever it was that set off that triggered the emotion at the beginning. But we know that reconnecting is a really powerful element to this whole process of a child learning about their feelings and ultimately being able to use words to describe their feelings rather than be overtaken by their bodily response. So in reconnecting, when we're just past the kind of distress moment and the child is beginning to calm, then helping the child use words for their needs and their feelings. Again, you might then still be able to come in and describe what happened and how it was tough for them, and starting to use words for what happened, and ensuring there's this restored connection. And saying sorry if you need to, if you kind of lost that calm moment yourself. And that's a fantastic model for the future. A lot of parents try with toddlers to force them to say sorry when they've done things wrong. Johnny hit Susie with the spade in the playground, or Susie might hit Johnny, whichever way it is, and we say, now go up and say sorry to the other child. That is very difficult for a toddler who still hasn't learnt to think beyond their own experience. But one of the things we can do is saying, it looks like that was really hard for you. You felt so cross when the other had your spade, and you got big feeling, didn't you? I saw you looked so cross, and I saw your face go a bit red and your hands got really... Did you notice your hands went like that? It's like the toddler's beginning to get some understanding of their own bodily responses, and you providing them with an empathetic response actually builds their capacity to then think about the other person and their experience down the track. And talk about new ways of dealing with the problem. Next time, I'll make sure I've got 2 spades in the sandpit. So you've got 1, and so has your playmate, because it's so hard to share just the 1 spade. Because both of you like digging, don't you? Yeah, so working out how to reconnect. Now, sometimes when you bring up the incident again, the child will surge again with their feelings. Yeah, it was mine and I was playing with it. And this is not a disaster. Again, it's likely the second time round when they kind of have that feeling surge again, it's less intense than the first time round. It's like it hasn't caught them unawares, because often that first surge, it's like it blows them over completely. The second surge, when you're reconnecting and talking about what happened, when things have calmed down a bit and you go in, the brain is more on, they might flip their lid a bit again, but it's like they're learning how to manage that surge and then sort of come back to being able to talk and think about it. So that is actually great practice for a child to be able to be supported to go through that. And I think it is recognising that nobody's perfect. We are going to sometimes lose it. And you see here the 2 cross faces that the standoff at the OK Corral is on, isn't it? And when we do kind of have upsets and there's a mismatch, it is really important for us to ourselves as the model to talk about how Mummy got really cross. Harriet, You'll Drive Me Wild is a fantastic book for parents to read for themselves, of how the parent lost it and then was able to come in and reconnect with the child and say, oh, Mummy got so cross, and I'm sorry that I yelled, and I'm glad that we're back connected, so I'm okay, you're okay, and we're okay again. Again, image by Joanna. We don't want this experience for our children after upset. So in terms of thinking about reconnecting, this is sort of the other end of that extreme, go to bed without supper, which we know actually has incredibly damaging effects. If we leave children in high levels of distress or not resolved distress before they are left for the long night ahead, the cortisol levels, the stress response is still happening in their little bodies. And we want that not to be the case. We want them to come back to no stress response, because the stress response we know is not good for brain development. So if children are left in high levels of distress for long periods of time, then we know it's not good for their brains. So we want to make sure we reconnect and actually get things settled and sorted. Not letting the sun go down on anger. Yeah, making sure we reconnect so children aren't left on their own with lots of these very distressing feelings, and giving them the message that I'd go out of my way just to make sure you're okay. It's really important. The trick, though, in reconnecting is not tipping your child into shame. Again, it can be so easy to do, often by accident. We don't mean to do it. But when you raise an issue of what happened when the child kind of lost it, toddlers are very sensitive to feeling shamed and feeling like they're not good. They don't feel good about themselves. And so we've got to be really careful when we go back to reconnect in that we're still giving messages about, that they belong, that problems can be solved, they can trust us to guide them, that you still love them, everything can be worked out, that kind of message. So the toddler's not left feeling like they've messed up and there's no way to kind of reconnect. So I talk about sort of steps often of thinking about connect before correct. So often I don't even think about correcting at toddler stage, maybe not till later, but really important to connect first emotionally, name the feelings, and then offer this sort of soothing rhythm, deep pressure. And then help them process after the intensity has come out of the experience what happened. This is some of the words from Robin Dolby here, who's a lead in this area. When you push, I think you're running on empty. So let me give you a hug to see if that can fill you up, because I know you don't like to hurt your friends. It's a fantastic sort of statement because it's really helping the child sort of with their identity formation, because some children at this stage are beginning to get the idea that they're, sort of terrors, that they're out of control. I remember once a mother coming to see me with her toddler, and she said to me, I'm having real trouble with this little boy, and I looked at the little boy and he was wearing a T-shirt that said, I am the devil. And it's like, whoa. And it's sort of like the identity formation that's happening at this stage. It's really important that the message we give them is that we see their good attempts at... oh, my voice is going. Hang on. That's why the water's there. We see their good attempts at connection, and we know that they do want to be friends with other children and friends with us, connected to us. It's just very difficult for them sometimes when they get these surges in feelings. And this reconnecting after upsets, and recalling important moments of connection as well, so that they remember how important they are to you and to others. So as we're moving along, and you're doing very well sitting there patiently, we're going to look at self-care. And this is incredibly important. And I often use this image because I do fly quite a bit with work, and I'm not a fan of the little plane. If ever there's a storm, I'm in a little plane. So just remember that. It seems to always line up like that. And what do they say? Put on the mask on yourself before assisting infants. So the really important message here is that if you're not doing well yourself in your own energy and how you're feeling with this role of parenting, if you don't feel supported, it's very difficult for you to keep that calm, centred approach with your child when they're really kind of pushing some limits. So your well-being is critical to your toddler and to parenting. And, it does require a lot of energy to parent, as I'm sure you know, and lots of time and making meaning, which means you need to have your thinking mind happening for yourself. You need to be able to think clearly about what's going on for your infant. And I'm sure that many of you who are here tonight and out there in internet land, this is why you come to these sorts of things, so you really can grapple with what is happening for my infant. You're really trying to get your mind thinking about what's going on for them. And so it is important to think about, why is this so hard? Why is parenting of toddlers really challenging? We often think toddlers and teenagers, the terrible twos or the terrible Ts. And it does come across that toddlers is a very hard stage of parenting, even though there are incredible joys along the way with it. And I think sometimes it is partly because we are often carrying exhaustion. We're still recovering from sleepless nights and this role adjustment with being a parent of children that often can be very demanding. Yeah. Of course, it is toddlers' way to want to explore the world, isn't it? And if you walk in on this scene, of course it will activate, why is it so hard not to lose it? Yeah? And it's interesting, I think even this image can really set us off. And partly because often we think about food as being like, I'm giving you something so precious here that I've put lots of time and energy into, and then you give me this face? Like, it's almost like you're rejecting me and who I am as a parent. And this is about your survival, this is about me nurturing. And so you can see why a face like this with presenting food can really move us from that calm-centred parent. And, we have to recognise that the toddler is trying to flex their muscles. They are trying to learn how to be separate and be more in control of their world. After being incredibly vulnerable as a baby and not being able to influence a lot apart from you, hopefully responding to their cries and to their goos and gahs and those sorts of things. When you become a toddler, you've got more at your end of your hands and feet of how you can control the world. And you will want to try and say no and try and control what's happening in your world to feel like this is a new stage of life where I do have more control. And how we respond as a parent is really important to that. And sometimes it is affected by our own histories. So this idea, in our own nurseries growing up, there might be ghosts or skeletons in our own closet. And sometimes we don't necessarily know this because the first few years of our life we don't have memory of, not conscious memory. But how important are the first few years of life for laying the foundation for then how we parent? And so sometimes these ghosts are very significant to us of what happened to us early on. And we know that history can repeat. And unfortunately, parents who don't want to parent in a certain way, end up parenting in ways that they didn't want to. And that can feel very distressing. I never wanted to be that parent, and I'm suddenly like that parent that I didn't want to be. The hopeful thing in all of this, though, is that the more you're aware of the buttons that get pressed for you or the ghosts in your nursery, the less likely they are to actually influence how you parent. So it is about doing some reflection yourself often about, your parents and the struggles that they might have had, not as a blame game, because, of course, when you think of them, they were doing the best they could with the experience they had of being parented. It's like everyone's doing the best they can, with what they've experienced. And so 2 faces to be aware of. One I've mentioned already, the frightened face. Remember the face of the parent who goes frightened on the child and how that impacts the child. Often we have to get more aware of what triggers us to look frightened and also what triggers us to look frightening to our children when we lose it. And I can remember my own little boy saying to me that you're frightening me, Mum, when I got cross. I think it was such a shock to him because normally I was quite a placid person and quite sort of even-tempered. And then one day I did lose it. And he said, you're frightening me. And it's like, whoa, that's a moment, isn't it? Just by my face that it scared him. And we need to be more aware of that, don't we? That what sort of face are we giving to our child and tone of voice are we giving to our child? And I think this is where, in the last few minutes, I'm just going to quickly give you some ideas about mindfulness, because it's the in thing, and I have to tell you, honestly, it's got so much to offer you if you're interested. This idea of being more present-focused, trying to get your mind to be more aware of the present moment, and in a way that's kind of not critical of yourself, accepting and without judgment, can be so useful. And it's a useful way of making sure that your mother doesn't come out if that's something you don't want to have happen. And in everyday tasks, there's so many opportunities to practice it, bringing your attention to the here and now moment. When your mind starts running away to the past or to the future, just bringing yourself back to the here and now and using your senses to do that. And just recognise when you have thoughts that drag you away from the here and now and just bringing yourself back. It's a constant kind of practice that you can be doing that will really help you in your parenting. The other thing about mindfulness is that it gives you an opportunity to have more pleasure in your everyday experiences. How many of you have cups of tea or coffee during the day? I'm sure most of you do, or a lovely cool glass of water. But how many of you are doing it on what I call automatic pilot, which means you're not present for it? So you're not actually getting any goodness out of it. It won't take you any more time to have the cup of tea, but you'd actually been taking it in a way that actually gives you pleasure, which then gives you more kind of energy in your tank. It's interesting, sometimes parents say, I go to talks and they say, go and have a massage, that will help you with your self-care. Who's got time for a massage, let alone the expense? And then it's kind of gone within, a few hours of the experience, maybe a day if you've got a good masseuse, I don't know. But you've got to be looking for something more than that in everyday moments to top you up. Really, you can't be waiting the month for the massage. So really looking at where can I find pleasure, mastery, achievement, control. Cleaning the kitchen bench actually can be a useful thing because you can actually feel like you've got more control in your world, and getting your partner to support you in that can be really useful. And then being kind to yourself. This is the work of Kristen Neff. Self-compassion, it's a powerful tool. How many of us have got the critical coach inside our head instead of the self-compassionate coach? What would we say to our friend when they're having struggles, and how is that different to what we say to ourselves is an important thing to think about. I love this image here because I never did it. But I did want to highlight that re-engaging with exercise, they've shown it makes a huge difference for your capacity to help manage children with their big feelings. And even though we didn't do anything as fancy as this, every day we went for a walk. It was like, in the pusher and we're out and we're doing the walk. And it's somehow something about that gives you a different life experience when you're outside of your house. And the Swedish people go out even when it's like minus temperatures and rug up their children. So even when it's raining and whatever, it's an experience to get out there in the outside world, changes your perspective. But also you're putting your body through a little stress response. You're making your heartbeat go faster and then getting it to settle again. And that's what feelings are. They are a bodily response. And you're putting yourself through it and conquering the experience of that through exercise, and that can be so useful. And lastly, but almost not leastly, think about laughter, and think about how you might be able to bring in more joy into your experiences and fun and laughter, because we know that actually, again, lifts you for parenting rather than feeling like you kind of everything becomes serious business, which is problematic. And this is you and your support network. You need to know who are the people that get you and will support you. And that's really important, so that when you're really struggling, you can reach out and someone's going to be there. And often you've got to practice that reach out. It doesn't sometimes come naturally to ask for help. And there is help if it's not in your support network of friends and family. Again, I'm giving a promo here to children's centres where there's staff there that really are about supporting parents through the joys and the challenges and tough times of parenting toddlers. And so, you know, there are people out there that will want to support you in that. So, and I think that's a place where I'm going to finish and have questions. Yeah. So if you've got, thank you. If you've got questions, if you can ask with the microphone so that people who are watching on the webcast can hear your question, that'd be great. And we've got half an hour, so if people have got questions, I'd love to have a go at seeing if I can respond to them. Yes, there's one.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm the mum of a 13-month-old.
Yes.
And I'm also going to be starting a family daycare business.
Yes.
And I already know one of the kids that I'm going to be looking after, and I just babysit him from time to time. Mm-hmm. I had him on Monday. It's more about, and had him in my home with my child, and his mother couldn't get back to get him for 8 hours, and he was distressed nearly the entire time. Oh. And I tried everything in my power. It was really upsetting. He was just crying. I was cuddling him and, you know, singing to him. We went outside, we went for a walk, we tried everything. By the end of the day, my child was really upset and distressed.
Yeah.
I actually saw him go over and give the other boy a cuddle at one point, which was like, you know, it's upsetting even talking about it. It's not, you know. I ended up ringing his mum, and she came back and got him.
Yes.
She's wanting me to have him next year, like once I finish my study and everything. How do we go about getting him where he feels comfortable at my house? And would he be upset now? Would he have an association with my place and being really upset? It was one of the first times his mum's ever left him as well. So yeah. So that's a long one. But
it's a good question, though, isn't it? And it raises lots of things, doesn't it? So I suppose one of the things that, you know, for toddlers, it's a really huge thing being separated from their caregiver, and it really is a crisis for them, whether or not it's going to a new house and being separate, or whether or not it's sleeping in a separate room overnight, separate from their caregiver. These are kind of like big things for toddlers, and yes, that toddler clearly was saying to you, this is maybe too much for me, might have needed, you know, mum to come sooner, but sometimes it can't be helped, can it, that those things happen. I think there are lots of things that you can do potentially, though, to assist in those kind of situations for thinking down the track. So he'll be that little bit older, which will be great. And also thinking about how do you sort of scaffold him for coming in, so that you start maybe with short visits, and maybe having mum there more frequently at the beginning, and then doing some kind of adjustment, because the child will work out that you're a safe person by seeing the parent looking at you with confidence and with kind of, you know, respect and positivity. And which is why, you know, those transition moments of going into childcare and into preschool, you know, having those visits early on is really important, because the child needs to watch your face, look at their face, look at your face to say, okay, this is a safe place. And then supporting them with often with little rituals at the beginning for us being able to separate, and parents being really clear about when it is time to go and not necessarily hovering and hesitating. But what you also pick up there is that feelings are catchy. And so, you know, you can catch the feeling of the child's distress, and
I did.
You did.
For sure.
Yeah.
Even talking about it, I feel upset.
Yeah.
Like, you know, like I was thinking, if that was my little boy,
absolutely,
it would just be so heartbreaking to know that he was distressed for that long.
Absolutely. And so, and your child also picked up the distress as well. Yeah. So again, it's one of those things to recognise that feelings are catchy. That's the mirror neuron system happening, that when we really tune into another person, a little person, we get their feelings. And so then we have to do something with that, so that we keep ourselves in that sort of calm space. And probably for you, having a support network around you, so you could bring in the troops to support you, that might have made a difference maybe. So, but thank you for that question.
Thank you.
Oh, hi, Mandy. I've got a question from someone watching the webcast.
Fantastic.
What tips do you have for checking in during rough and tumble play?
That's a good one, the rough and tumble play. I think one of the things with rough and tumble play is we don't want to leave it to just before bedtime. That's one of the key things. I think thinking about when is the quiet alert state for your child for that type of play. Sometimes we come in with play attempts when children are beginning to kind of become overtired, and our matching of using distraction and rough and tumble play when they're already slightly fractious, that can be not so useful. So you imagine the child who's getting a bit grumpy and the parent comes along and says, "Oh, I'll throw you up in the air to distract you." Now, initially that might break the kind of, sort of grumpiness, but really underneath, think of the iceberg, is maybe a child who's getting tired and is already kind of beginning to get a bit raw around the edges. So rough and tumble play is really for when, the child's in the right state of alertness and ready for that kind of play. And then really it is about continuing to check in with their non-verbal and verbal cues. Yeah, because sometimes what you see too is there's just can be a slight change in the pitch of their laughing, and they're beginning to go to hysteria. That kind of, you see YouTube clips of it, where the child is looking like they're happy and then suddenly they're kind of, there's a fine line between extreme ecstasy and extreme terror. So that on roller coasters, hey. But that can be the tipping point, and you need to be watching for that with children, that you're keeping in that window of tolerance.
Thanks, Mandy. Another question from a webcast person. Do you have any tips for preparing a toddler for a new baby coming into the family?
Oh, there are so many good tips for preparing a toddler. It's so interesting, isn't it? Because it's often in toddlerhood that parents forget the terrible experience of the birth and decide, oh, let's do this all again. And the toddler is still at a stage where they're really struggling with the idea of another. So they get the idea of the parent and them, and often they will find even the other parent hard to let them in sometimes. It's like there's the very strong bond with the one parent, and then they'll allow the other one in for certain activities, but maybe not for others. But then to have to share that parent with another baby, that's really challenging. One of the things that's a big trap in this area is to try and paint the picture of the new baby as all positive, because your toddler is going to have a whole range of feelings about the new baby, and they're not all going to be positive. And if you go, oh, it's going to be so wonderful to have the baby home, and you're going to be best friends, and you can help me care for them, and you paint this sort of really positive kind of light, and the toddler might warm up to that, but then when they meet the baby and they see the special bond you have with them, and of course you have to develop that special bond with the next baby, and they get other feelings, where do they go with that? Because it's like you haven't given permission for that. Again, if I think of my own children, we had a book called Sam's Sandwich. I don't know if it's out there anymore, but it was a wonderful book for my son at the time, who was waiting for Ping Ping. He called the baby inside my tummy, which ended up being Gemma. It was a story basically of Sam, who had a little sister who he made a sandwich, and in every layer of the sandwich he put a different critter. So it's like in the lettuce was a slug, and then you'd turn the page and in the tomato there was a caterpillar, and then it was like he was sort of putting in nasty things in this lovely sandwich. Now, you'd think to yourself, why did she give that book to that boy? But he was a little boy that he was longing for his sister. He really was looking forward to it. And it was like he couldn't accept almost that it could come with its struggles, and he might have feelings sometimes of not necessarily wanting that baby to be there. So kind of using that book as a warm-up to the baby became a useful thing. And then after we had the sister, why does she keep crying like that? I don't want her anymore because she's crying like that. Had more permission to be able to say those things. Again, always just the positive script of it's always going to be all good just can shut down other experiences for children. And is it okay to sometimes feel anger, jealousy? Yes, we all have those feelings. And that's part of being able to be a well-rounded person, to have those feelings, not necessarily act on them, but be able to use the words for that so then you can have your needs met at the same time, I think becomes really important. Hopefully that's helpful. There's a couple of questions here as well. Do you want to pass that?
I've got a just over 2-year-old
Yes.
daughter. She can be playing very happily with others and a 6.5-year-old brother, and she will then begin to pinch or push or scratch.
Yes.
Is that overstimulation, or is it that she's struggling to deal with a feeling that we can't work out or see those early warning signs? It happens so quickly.
It happens really quickly.
She's drawn blood on other children's faces, and it's it's so hard to deal with as a situation.
And that's hard to deal with as well for you, is it? Yeah. And I can see you're getting emotional as you think about it. Yeah. I think one of the hardest things for us as parents is sometimes helping our children when they are feeling those hurtful feelings towards other children, and keeping ourselves steady in that moment can be really tricky, and not getting that kind of anxious feeling kind of in response to it. And it could be that she might need more support being the little one in a group of older children. I think sometimes it can be quite challenging for young children to be playing with older children. That can actually have its own challenges because they're wanting to have more control over their environment, and often the older children are running the play, if you know what I mean, because they're older and have more competence.
She's actually done it with her peers though, more.
And with their peers as well.
She'll do it to her brother, but it's been more in her peers.
So it could well be that the length of time is too long for her. So you might want to sort of look at how long is she able to play okay, and then do we need to get in sooner, because it's like she doesn't give us a cue until she's lost it with the scratching and sort of coming in and say, let's come in and have special, mummy and you time, because sometimes when you stay too long, they get those big feelings, and we want to see if we can help you not have be able to hurt your brother and your friends, because we know you want to play nicely, because I saw you play beautifully before, but come in now, let's have our time together. And giving some language around it, so to say things like, sometimes you get big scratchy feelings, and it's like it gets too much and then you want to scratch, and we want to use words if it gets too much so we don't hurt our friends. But you do that after the event, so you'd go back and revisit what happened later with them and give some words for that, because in the moment she just needs help to kind of be calm. And
that's great. Yeah, thank you very much.
That's okay. Now I think there's three back there.
Hi. I was just going about
There's two microphones. Sorry, that's confusing.
So sorry.
That's okay.
Didn't even notice.
That was confusing, wasn't it?
Oh.
Okay.
Sorry, I've got a 3-year-old, and then where you was talking about the phone, how they could get confused and they think that their parent or something could be on the phone.
Yes.
My son does that a lot, and he gets really angry when his father goes to hang up.
And
I get the attention that he thinks that I'm keeping him away from him or something.
Yeah, it could be. It could be.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, this concept, because remember, toddlers can be very concrete in the way they think about things. So, if you think about telephones and how they work, and television's the same, a lot of children think that the actors are inside the television, and that they live in that box or that flat screen now. and same with the telephone, and then he's turning his anger to you as like, you're stopping me connecting with Dad when I really want to. I mean, really, probably what's underneath that behaviour is that he's finding it hard to be separate from his dad, and he doesn't know how to express that. And because you're there, you're kind of going to cop it, I think.
That's what I'm thinking. How do I, what do I do to not, so he doesn't get so upset, and to help him?
Yeah, I think it is that thing of naming what he's sad about or cross about. And again, it might start with, because sometimes, again, remember, you see cross as the first behaviour, but really, or the first feeling, but really underneath that might be sadness, and then maybe underneath that might be fear. Like, is Daddy ever coming home? And because remember, time is such a strange thing for children. It's very difficult for them to say, oh, Daddy's coming home on the weekend. You think, well, what's the weekend? Particularly for where partners have to work away for a week and come back. That is really hard for toddlers because they don't understand those kind of how time works like that. And because they're in the present moment, this feels like this is it. This is how it is forever. So you imagine the cutting off of the phone call is like, will I ever see Daddy again? So it might mean you might have to have some other strategies with him around, getting out a photo or having a way to mark down days for seeing him next. Those kinds of things that just might help to kind of go, I know you get cross, and it might be because you're sad, but maybe because you're worried that you might not see Daddy for a while. But Daddy will be home soon. And
So you mean like a schedule of a time when he actually calls and things like that? Or...
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it's funny with small children, often things like schedules don't work as well, as in, reward charts don't work. But sometimes, having a way in which you can mark time for children, so those visual schedules, they can be useful. So in terms of saying, this is what is happening this morning, this is what's happening this afternoon. Did you ever see that in play groups and they go, it's mat time now, and they pull that off, and now it's song time, and now it's outside time. It sort of helps children get a structure, and sometimes using that idea for if parents are away for periods can be quite useful.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we better come down to this lady here.
Thank you. I've got a little girl, she's nearly 20 months, and I just want your advice with the checking in. What would you suggest when they're flailing and they're doing the arch back? And
yes.
When's the point? Do you just sort of let them be, and then check in after they've had their, physical moment? They're not hitting, but they're just obviously beyond the point of you being able to sort of reason or calm down.
Yes.
Yeah, I'd just like you.
So are you, at the moment, are you trying to hold her while she's doing the arching
and
back?
She's great. It's more the whole, I love the possessions of a toddler. It's like if I had it 4 hours ago, it was mine. It's more that's what I'm finding.
Yes.
If in those group situations. So then I'm a bit like, I'm not really sure what to do when she is that point of, she's lost control of her body yet, and you're trying to hold her, I'm trying to hold her, and she's doing the arch. And
Yep.
do you just take it away from that? You just remove from the situation?
Yeah, usually. So particularly if you're in a public sort of space, yeah. I mean, the idea of kind of moving away from that sort of public space into a private sort of space for you and the child to kind of help to calm, I think is quite useful. One, because it can get you out of feeling like all eyes are on you, which doesn't help you stay calm and centred. And the other for the child is that it's quite a stimulating environment if there's other children and the toys are still there and the upset is right there in front of them. Whereas if you can kind of move them away to a different space, that actually can be quite useful for them to help them calm down. Sometimes I think, though, you don't necessarily have to be holding the child if they're doing the arching and those sorts of things. It can be that the child, you find a beanbag or on the bed, and they might be having a sob and a weep on the bed, and you're sitting close by. That can you can still be kind of connected, but not necessarily holding. Because sometimes children, when they're being held, they will do more the battling against you, and you don't want to be ramping it up, but more giving the message of I'm here and I care what you're going through, and it's really tough for you right now, and we'll wait until you start to feel a bit better.
Thank you.
That's okay. Hi.
We've got a 2.5-year-old boy.
Yes.
And he can be playing beautifully with other kids if we're not around. And then the moment that we rock up, he might just decide to turn around and whack whatever's moving, whether it's a dog or a chair or another kid. So even at childcare, we've never had a complaint, but we might go and pick him up, and when we arrive, he'll railroad some kid.
Yeah.
Is it something, I guess our reaction is, what I'm looking for guidance on?
Yeah. Look, that's a fantastic example, and it's a very common one, because when the child sees you arrive, it becomes a transition moment. Yeah, because before they were kind of in the zone of this is the activity that I'm engaged with, the parent arriving is kind of giving them a message of something's about to change. And when something's about to change, that ramps up the kind of anxiety or stress levels in the child, and then what to do with that feeling. And sometimes the impulsive thing is then to, do the hit out thing. And so it is about negotiating. How do we negotiate a transition moment for that child? How do we support them when we arrive? Maybe it is about when you arrive looking at can we stay for a bit rather than immediately looking at removing the child, say, from the play. You might go and join them in the play for a while before then. It's time to go, so that it's not like an immediate that's triggering me to feel like that's the end of playtime now, or that could be part of it. I mean, I think, sort of saying it looks like it's hard when you see mum and dad, that you think it's time to finish play and you get big feelings about that. It's hard to leave when you've had a lovely day at childcare. It looks like you've had a really lovely day. And then you get the big feeling when you see me come to pick you up. And we're going to help with that, because I know you don't want to be hurting the dog or whatever it was, yeah? And again, maybe it's not in the moment that you do that. Maybe it's like when you get home and you're in sort of the quiet of the sort of later to say, I notice every time I come and pick you up from childcare, I think you get big feelings. I think you get really big feelings. I think tomorrow when I come, we need to think how we can help you with those big feelings. So it's again giving language to it. And amazing, kids will get onto it really quickly when you come and say, I've got big feelings. I've got big feelings. And this is a huge transition from hitting the dog to using language for describing what's going on in the body. That's my first thoughts for you. Yeah.
I have a question about jealousy.
Jealousy?
Yes. My son is very jealous to his dad. When we are together and my husband's trying to hug me or to sit close to me, my son doesn't allow to do that. He gets crossed and he screams, he pushes him away. And when we are together, he doesn't allow him to dress him, to feed him, to put him in the car. And we have very strange weekends together.
Yes.
So can you...
How old is your boy?
He's almost 2.
Yeah. This is a very common stage of development. It's like, as I was mentioning before, the toddler initially often bonds with the one first, before they're able to kind of move on to the other. And in your situation, your boy has very much connected to you and can't imagine life without you and him at the complete centre of that experience. And so it is difficult for your partner to come in, and it's very hard for the toddler to get his mind around the idea that he can share you with your partner. And so, and particularly share loving things, it's like that's just between you and him. It will shift and change as he begins to separate a bit more from you. So as he kind of is able to see that he is able to be more separate from you, and that the bond is still there, but he's able to be more separate, he will be able to then open up to the possibility of you having another relationship and your partner maybe being able to help him with dressing and those sorts of things.
At what age will it happen?
Well, I'd love to pluck an age out the sky for you and just give it to you. I mean, every child is a bit different, but it is a very common experience. And so again, you sort of, it's whether or not we had the question before about, the new sibling coming along, or whether or not it's the adjustment to sharing mummy with somebody else. It's the same dilemma of, I need to feel that I'm the centre of the universe when I'm a toddler, and that mum particularly revolves around me. And until I'm able to kind of loosen that a bit and know that I won't be annihilated, I won't fall apart, the world won't collapse when I'm more separate, that things start to shift and change. Sometimes it is worth still working out, are there any activities that the child can do with Dad?
He stays basically with him all day while I'm at work. So he spends most of the time with his dad, and he's fine, absolutely. He's happy, he enjoys that. But at the weekends, no, I don't need daddy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and that gives another context to this, doesn't it? It's probably is partly to do with he knows he's got Dad during the weekdays, and it's like when Mum arrives, it's like, wow, now I really need to have Mum now, and Dad gets the kind of push to the background. Really important that Dad doesn't kind of ramp up his feelings of rejection, because that then gives the child more sense of control and power in that. So, when you see sort of parents pouting, or, you made Daddy cry because, those sorts of things, sometimes that doesn't actually have the effect that you hope it will. It can give the child a sense of the parent being frightened. Remember we said about frightened and frightening, and that the child is actually more in control of the dynamic, which you don't necessarily want to be reinforcing that idea that he is more in control. So I'd say calm and centered of it looks like it's hard for you to be with Daddy when Mummy's around. You really want to be with Mummy. And then if you want to set a limit and say, but Daddy's going to change your into your pajamas now, and then if there's upset, but you're still going to go ahead with that action, but then really doing that naming it. Oh, you're so cross about it, and you're sad because you really want Mummy to do it. I think you miss Mummy a lot when she's at work, and when Mummy's home, you just want to eat her all up and have her all to yourself. And it's hard to share Mummy.
Yeah, so we tried it. It didn't work. He just behaves badly. He's trying to hit Daddy and say,
I think it is sort of that thing of saying, we again, those rules of like, you stay safe, I stay safe, and things stay safe. So sometimes we do need to come in and set some limits around things like hitting, and really help the child not feel out of control. So we make sure that everyone stays safe and we don't hit people, and you might need to come over and have a cuddle and calm down before we can go on and do the next thing, because we don't hit, because I know that you love being with Daddy during the week and you have a lovely time, but on weekends it's just really hard.
So should I allow him to behave that way and push my husband away while he's with me on weekend, or do what I want?
I think you can mix it up, to be honest. I mean, I think it's sort of accepting that he does have those feelings and that he does need time with you. But sometimes you might have to say, but this is how it's going to be, and he will be upset. But then he's learning through that upset. The world doesn't implode. The world doesn't, you don't go away, and you still are there if your partner does help him with some of those activities. So I wouldn't go all one way or the other, but just be really clear when you make a decision that Dad's going to do the activities, that then you follow through with that and help him with the feelings that come up when that happens.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Hi.
I have a 2-year-old son who's recently been diagnosed with autism.
Yes.
Now, we have a big challenge with mealtime. As soon as he gets picked up to be put in the high chair, he arches his back and screams.
Yes.
I basically often cannot get him to eat without losing it. It's hard to calm him down. I try and explain to him, once you've eaten your food, you can go down and play with your trains or play with your ball. But he often just screams. Sometimes I try and bring his trains to the high chair or his book blocks or something to help, so he's still doing something, but he just will not stop crying and don't know what to do.
That sounds really tough for you,
Yeah.
hey? That's a really tricky one. And again, anything around food, we know it really stirs us up as mothers, I think. And you say he's had a recent diagnosis, and that often creates a whole lot of grief and distress as well. Is he a little person that's overweight or underweight or travelling okay with his weight?
Travelling really well, I guess average for what he was travelling when he was younger. He was underweight, but now he's good. However, he has got iron deficiency because of his fussy eating and lack of eating.
Because I think sometimes, I think there are different responses sometimes for if a child's really struggling with their nutritional kind of needs, then, I think it does need kind of a sort of health response, to get support around that. But sometimes when children are rejecting a lot of food and not wanting to sort of eat, but they're actually travelling okay with their weight, sometimes, our persistence with offering and trying to distract with, having the telly on and spooning in when they're not noticing, or entertaining them with things while we're trying to feed them, that often creates patterns that are not so useful, and we might be better to go back to the idea of I offer the food and then what he eats is his choice in it, and not having like a lot of emotionally laden with it, because sometimes we try and be super, ooh, here it comes, it's so exciting, we've loaded it with emotion, or come on, you've got to eat, we've loaded it with emotion. Whereas if we can be really neutral and present food, if the child says, no, I don't want it, it's like, okay, we'll put it away and we can come back to it later. And then, what we find with most children is that over time, if we're consistent with that kind of approach, is that then they do actually start going back to kind of eating. Now, in your situation, I'm not sure if you might need more support, and would encourage you maybe with, who's supporting you around his diagnosis to maybe give you more support around that, because sometimes it is more complex if a child's having difficulties with his nutritional requirements. You might not want to just say, here it is, and then take it away. He might need additional support. So hope that's helpful.
Thank you. Yes, thank you.
Okay, I think time might be up. So I'm happy to stay here for a bit and chat with people if they want to come up and talk to me at the end. So thank you very much for having me.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mandy, for that wonderful presentation, as always. If you want to hear Mandy again, you can watch a recording of this session. It'll be on our Parenting SA website from tomorrow, and we'll be sending you an email with the link to the recording. And please tell your friends and colleagues that it's there as well. Thanks to everyone for coming tonight. A reminder to please fill in your feedback sheets that are on your chairs and put them in the boxes on the way out. Webcast people, thank you for watching.